Hello friends, up till now in Unit 1 in Business Communication we have discussed quite a number of topics. We have discussed about the various definitions of communication. We have talked about the importance of communication. We had a look at what role basically communication plays, and then we talked about the communication process, the standard model and the various elements of communication. Plus we talked about, in the last session that we had, the various channels. We talked about the different types of channel, for example external communication, within which we talked about outward and inward channel. You would understand and you would recall that external communication is when one party in the communication process, either the sender or the receiver, is from outside the organization. Then this is external communication. Communicating with some entity outside your organization is external communication. Outward is when the communication is flowing from you to somewhere, to some entity outside. So you are the sender and somewhere outside is the receiver. Inward is when the sender is outside the organization and you are the recipient of the communication. Then we talked about internal communication, which is within the organization, wherein we talked about formal and informal. Formal channels we talked about, which are basically established channels, for example notices and circulars and the letters and applications which you many a times send to your faculty members when you are not there in the class, when you have to take a leave. So they are all formal channels. Informal is when these formal channels don't work and you pass on the communication without using such established channels. So this is what informal channel is all about, right? So we talked about this difference. Then we talked about the other type of categorization where we talked about vertical channels, horizontal channels, diagonal channels, and we took some examples also. We had a look at this particular picture to understand what we mean by the lateral or the horizontal channel, what we mean by the vertical channel, and what we mean by the diagonal channel. And we understood that if the communication is passing using diagonal channel, then it would be known as diagonal communication, and if the communication is using the lateral channel or the horizontal channel, it would be known as horizontal or lateral communication, right? Now let's today talk about the essentials of effective communication. I remember that the last lecture actually was a little longer, and it was almost 17 minutes long, and we had committed to keep the lecture shorter. So what I'll do is to compensate for that, and just to ensure that you remain motivated, I'll keep this particular lecture very short. So what are the essentials of effective communication? How can you be very, very effective? And what do we mean basically by being effective? By being effective, we mean that whatever you intend to communicate, whatever message you are trying to send to somebody, the receiver is able to understand that message exactly in that fashion. So if you are trying to communicate to somebody that you are very handsome, he should be able to understand that exactly in that particular fashion. However, if you have communicated that you are very smart, but the other person has taken it as an insult, then probably the communication has not been effective, right? So while we'll be talking about effective communication, here we are going to talk about how to be an effective sender of communication. So we are going to talk from the sender's perspective, how to be effective. First thing is, you have to have good command over the subject. So if you are communicating something to somebody, you have to have good understanding of that particular topic, that particular subject, right? Second is, you should know the receiver's background. You should know about the receiver. You should know what all languages does he understand. Why do we need to do this? Because, for example, if my receiver understands English and I have communicated to him using Hindi, then probably he would not be able to understand what I've said, and the communication would not be effective. So I have to know about my receiver. I have to understand his background. I have to understand what all languages does he know. I have to know whether he knows any language or he's an illiterate fellow, because in that case my way of communicating, the encoding would be in a different fashion. So for example, if I'm communicating to somebody who is not literate, who is an illiterate, who does not know how to read and write, I would want to probably communicate to him by probably talking to him, because that way he'll be able to understand. So I would not send him a letter. So if my boss, let's say, is an illiterate guy, and this can always happen, and I have to go on a leave, I would not be sending him an application. What I would rather do is I would go to him, talk to him face to face, tell him, sir, that I want a leave today, and this is how I'll apply for the leave. So depending on the background of the receiver, I have to make changes in how I am communicating to that particular receiver, right? So we had taken some examples in the last session also. I told you how you communicate to your mother that you are feeling hungry. You don't talk to her in English because you know that she doesn't understand English. On the other hand, if you are trying to communicate the same thing to your teacher, maybe then you might be using English because you know that Hindi is generally not used in the department. Again, if you are talking to somebody who is maybe hearing impaired, who is a deaf person, then in that case you would be making use of sign language to communicate to him that you are hungry, right? So you have to understand the receiver's background. Then again, please use simple words only. Don't use bombastic words. Do not use very complicated words. And that is why I have been telling you that if you want to speak good English, you don't need to learn, you don't need to cram the whole dictionary. Because the whole dictionary, if you start cramming, you would not only be learning simple words, but you would be learning very, very difficult words. I'll give you an example of a study which found out that to talk any language in a reasonably okay manner, you need to know just 800 words, and these would be 800 simple words. Just by knowing 800 simple words in Hindi or English or maybe in another language, you would be able to at least communicate in that particular language. You may not be an expert, but you would be able to communicate reasonably well. On the other hand, if you further increase your vocabulary to 2000 words in that particular language, you would be almost like an expert. So what I'm trying to tell you is, you don't have to use complicated words. So when you are reading dictionaries, you don't need to use all the words which are there in the dictionary. You just need to use their simplest synonyms. So for example, there are two words, hardworking and diligent. There's no need for you to use the word diligent. You can use the word hardworking also, and this would be a simple word. It would be easier for you to use, and it would be easier for the recipient also. He would be able to understand it well. So you simply do not need to cram the meaning of diligent also to be able to speak reasonably good English. You just need to know what hardworking means. You just need to be able to make use of it. And that is why I've been telling you that please don't worry about the vocabulary that much unless you are appearing for CAT or some banking exam. Just 700 to 800 simple words in English language are more than sufficient, right? Now let's talk about brevity. What do we mean by brevity? The brevity word has been formed from the same root word from which you have the word brief. Brief means in short, chota. So brevity means you have to keep your message very, very short. Don't go for unnecessary details. Don't go for a long explanation. If you can do without that, if you can keep the things shorter, it would be better for you. It would be easier for the recipient to understand your message. And how can you do that? You can make use of pictures and illustrations. You must have heard that particular saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So you can go for pictures, you can go for illustrations, pictures, you can go for some diagrams. So rather than telling how the heart works, if you show a particular diagram, that would be easier for everybody, for all the recipients to understand. Rather than telling which part of the country Uttarakhand falls in, Uttarakhand is situated in, if you show a map and tell the audience that this is where Uttarakhand is, they would be able to understand better, right? And many a times you use emoticons also. So rather than telling somebody on WhatsApp that you are feeling very happy and you are a little angry, or maybe you are feeling sad, what do you do nowadays? You send across emoticons, emojis, and just by using one emoji you are able to communicate how you are feeling. So this is how you can ensure brevity in your communication, right? You can make use of cartoons also. Now what do we mean by this kiss? Don't get me wrong, I'm not using a word which is vulgar. Kiss basically here means, and I have talked about this particular word, keep it short and simple. This is what I'm trying to communicate to you, that you always need to use this particular principle. Keep it short and simple. However, I do not want to say that you keep it so short that you are not able to send across the entire message. So for example, if you have to give a presentation on the book that you have read, just to make it short, don't give just one slide wherein you just tell about the name of the book and the author. You have to send across the message, but try to send it across in minimum number of words. That is what I mean by brevity, and that is what the KISS principle talks about. Keep it short and simple, right? And we have said that you have to keep your message, you have to make it as interesting as possible. You can make use of stories, anecdotes. I hope you remember what we mean by stories and anecdotes. You make use of some stories to make your message interesting. Anecdotes, you might narrate something that has happened with you or maybe some other person. You might make use of some fun facts. I hope you know what we mean by fun facts. For example, a fun fact is that there are millions of hair on your head. So this is an example of a fun fact. Then you might ask questions while communicating something, so that will keep the audience interested and involved, and they would be forced to pay attention to what you are saying. And then you may also make use of quotations. So you might use quotations, things which have been said by some well-known people. So that is something that you can use, and this will make your communication more effective. Again, whenever you are trying to communicate, do rehearse well. And here we are basically talking about spoken communication, so do rehearse well. So for example, if you are about to make a presentation, so you have to take care of all these things. But once we are through with the presentation, you have prepared the presentation, also rehearse it, practice it twice, thrice, until you start feeling confident about delivering it well. Then only go. Don't just go blank, don't just go straight and start presenting, because that would not make it as effective as it can be, right? So what you do is, if you have to make a presentation, first prepare the presentation and keep these things in mind, and then once the preparation is over, you have completed the presentation, then you rehearse it. You rehearse how you will be making the presentation. So you do it twice, thrice. So this will make your presentation more effective, and this goes for any lecture that you are about to give, for any speech also. Not only this, even if you have to interact face to face with your boss, be ready with what all things you will put across, what all questions you will be asking, what all doubts you would be presenting to him. Even if you are going for some interview, please make a list of possible questions, and please also rehearse the answers. You can ask one of your friends to come for a mock interview, and he'll be playing the role of the interviewer, and you can answer the questions put up by him, and this will help you rehearse the interview. The more you do this, the better you will be your ultimate performance, right? Now please understand, this was from the spoken communication point of view. If you are talking about the written communication, how to be effective, again you have to ensure that these things are there. But then apart from that, you also have to ensure that when you are writing something for purpose of communicating some message to somebody, instead of rehearsing, of course rehearsal would not be working here, do prepare drafts. The first draft would not be the best one, then you further improve it. So for example, if you have to write an essay, or let's say if you have to write an application, so do it on your computer and then improve that first draft. Use good words. Wherever you feel some improvement is required, keep making those changes. So you don't go with the first draft that you have prepared. You further refine it, and then after 2 revisions or maybe 3 revisions and refinements, then your final document would be ready, right? What do you know about these authors? For example, authors like Chetan Bhagat, the book that they have written and the book which you read, they are not their first drafts. It's not as if they've written something and straight away published it. They've written it and then they've read it again, they have made some additions, deletions, they've edited it, they've refined it, and then second draft, then again refined it, further refined it, third draft, fourth draft, and this is probably the 8th or the 10th draft that you are reading. So when you are going for a written communication, please do not simply use the first draft that you have come up with, try and refine it further. Is that okay? So that is how you have to be effective. That is how you can be effective in written communication. As far as being effective in listening communication, because that is also very important, that is in fact even more important than being effective in spoken communication or written communication. How can you be effective in listening communication? You have to attend fully to what the sender is saying. So if the sender is sending across a message, what is exactly he saying? What is his body language? What are his facial expressions? You have a look at everything and concentrate on what he is saying. And this will enable you to understand his message better. And you would be able to improve the effectiveness of your listening communication. Fine. So we have discussed communication from 3 aspects: the written communication, the spoken communication, and now the listening communication also. And I have told you that listening communication is also very, very important. In fact, managers are known to listen more than they speak. So they listen more than they speak, right? So for that you have to be an effective listener. And how you have to be an effective listener? How can you be an effective listener? By concentrating well on what the other person is saying. Fine. So thank you very much for your time.